Welcome to the International News Daily Podcast. I'm Denis Dunicic. Like, comment, share, subscribe to stay in the loop on global affairs. Many people have pondered and asked the question, is Russia losing the war? Or at the very least, its invasion of Ukraine. Now, we're going to look at some of the facts and generally what's going on to try and answer this question. The answer is not a simple yes or no, and it varies depending on how you want to look at the conflict. Is the answer a short-term one of what's happened so far, or terms of long-term probability of who is likely to win the conflict? Now, first and foremost, let's look at some of the numbers. And before I go any further, as a full disclaimer, I want to state that the numbers coming out of this conflict are not 100% fully reliable. Many of them are coming from either the Ukrainian or Russian government. Obviously, it goes without saying that both parties have a vested interest in portraying things as either worse or better than they are. So keep that in mind while I'm reporting on these numbers that have huge varying estimates. Now, in terms of Russian soldier deaths, it is estimated that the Russian forces have lost between 7,000 to 15,000 soldiers in this conflict. That is deaths. And I understand that the gap between 7,000 to 15,000 in terms of numbers, especially in terms of lives, is very large. Nonetheless, the reason that this exists is because different estimates have been provided by different groups, either the Ukrainian government, the Russian government, or different NGOs and third-party actors that are actively following this conflict. At the very least, Russia has lost 7,000 lives in this invasion. At the very worst, it's lost 15,000. And just to give you some perspective, if the number is closer to around 15,000, that is the exact amount of lives that were lost in the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. And that invasion took 10 years. Keep in mind that the war in Ukraine has only lasted since February 24th. It's been a month, and this many lives have been lost, at the very least, 7,000 Russian soldiers. In terms of Ukrainian casualties, it's estimated that around 1,300 to 1,500 soldiers have perished and lost their lives in the conflict. Now, that is a huge discrepancy, 1,400 to 7,000. It should be understood that in any conflict, when the attacking side is attacking a defending nation or a defending party, the attacker is always going to have significantly more casualties than the side that's defending. Typically, the casualties are 1 to 3, with the attacker losing 3 to 4 times more soldiers than the defending side, simply because of the nature of having to attack or take out an offensive, leaving soldiers out into the open for people who are in well-defended positions to just pick them off. Nonetheless, the standard is 3 to 4 to 1 loss on the defending side. In the best case scenario, it's 1 to 7. Now, the reason for this is the Ukrainian resistance has shown that it is extremely fierce, creative, and effective at fighting the invasion of Russian attackers. Now, another reason for this is because Russian soldiers are typically there just to get a paycheck or working their job or, working on their career in the military. Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians who have been fighting in paramilitary groups such as the Territorial Defense Force or outright militias are defending their homeland. So obviously, motivations are going to be higher on Ukraine's side, as they typically are in any kind of invasion on the defender's side. Now, in terms of general casualties, or people that have been wounded or taken out of the conflict, it's estimated that Russia has faced between 30 to 40,000 casualties. So not just 7 to 15,000 deaths, but 30 to 40,000 Russian soldiers have either been wounded or injured in some way that they've have to have been removed from the invading force of the conflict. Now, of the 7 to 15,000 deaths out of the 30 to 40,000 casualties, 6 are alleged to have been Russian generals. Now, I'm not saying that one life is more important than another, but the reality is any kind of conflict or combat exchange or war, when a field marshal or general dies, that causes massive confusion and is absolutely destructive to morale. Now, we're going to get into kind of some of the Russian goals or operational tactics that it's been trying to fulfill since its invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. It goes without stating that Russia has essentially failed to fulfill any of its goals or tactical strategies following its invasion. Russia has not managed to assert air dominance over Ukraine, something that is crucial to do when a greater power invades a smaller nation. Controlling the skies means that ground forces can very easily move in with the help of rain and hellfire from above. Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine, has not even been encircled or surrounded by Russian forces. Now understand that when invading a country, any country, the main goal of the invading force is to surround the capital city to be able to eventually lay siege to it, if not lay out an outright massive blitzkrieg-style offensive on the city. Another thing that it was extremely important at the beginning of the conflict for Russia to establish was a land bridge connecting Crimea to Russia's western border. Now, it would be able to do this if it would capture the incredibly crucial, as of port city of Mariupol, a city that has 430,000 people when it's not in conflict. Right now has about 100,000 people still in the city. A city that Russia had to capture and still has to capture in order to establish this land border to connect its Russian forces with its Crimean forces, allowing the Federation to carry out more effective and united offensives in Ukraine. It has failed to do so. Mariupol has still held out. It's been being bombed for the past 20 days, and the past few days have seen fierce fighting with Ukrainian defenders fighting for every single inch of road and making Russia's lives absolute hell to move forward, even on the slightest bit. Now, in terms of logistics, Russia is having a massive problem. It is having a shortage and difficulty transporting in fuel, water, and other supplies to its soldiers, particularly cold wear. So military gear that's able to be worn in the cold weather. Russian soldiers without these basic necessities cannot fuel or power their vehicles. They cannot fuel or power themselves. People need food and water to live, let alone go into conflict. And this has caused morale to completely decrease. That, in addition to the fact that Ukraine is a much smaller country and Russia should have achieved its main strategic goal by now, which in every form of conflict, the main goal is always to topple the head of state or the government. That's how you win a war. You topple the head of state or the government, either by eliminating them, by assassinating them, capturing them, or forcing them to go into exile. Volodymyr Zelensky is notably still alive, still healthy, still free, and still in Ukraine. As long as he is still there, and as long as other active members of his government are still there, Russia is not achieving its main goal. And this has been destroying Russian morale, which has basically created a massive war of attrition. Russia has been forced into a position where it's no longer attacking with its ground forces. Instead, its primary source of attack has been aerial bombardments, artillery strikes, or other form of long-range missile strikes on the cities of Ukraine, intending to destroy these cities, turn them into rubble, and force the civilians to leave, making ground forces moving in something that is much easier to accomplish. But in order to do so, Vladimir Putin is going to have to shell up support at home. Now keep in mind, in contemporary history, when a larger or greater power invades a smaller nation, it has actually been shown that the greater power tends to eventually lose. If you look at events like America's invasion of Vietnam, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and other invasions, particularly of Vietnam and Afghanistan, by other countries, what you can see is a pattern of larger nations moving in, initially having great success in their invasions and seeming like they're going to be victorious, but the war drawing out for years, if not decades, and the greater power eventually having to pull out in shame with the original government and the original heads of state of that nation coming back into power after waging guerrilla war for many, many years. Now, the reason that this happens is not that great powers don't have the capacity or the capability to weed out some kind of insurgency or defeat these smaller nations in war. The reality is what happens is these great powers lose support at home. The people domestically begin to criticize their leaders for soldiers, their own people coming back home in coffins, the extended and massive cost of going to war, and the fact that the nation is just embarrassing itself. This has already, in 1 month of invasion, become a massive problem for the Russian leadership, particularly Vladimir Putin. Keep in mind, when we talk about Russian leadership, we are talking about Putin himself. Russia has been turned into an autocratic country under the essential full control of Putin. Not complete control. No nation, especially a nation as large as the Russian Federation, can be run by just one man, but most of the decisions and most of the responsibility and authority lies in the hands of Putin himself. This has already become a problem in Russia. Typically, people tend to support wars that they are winning or that they can win. And the Russian people, despite Russian propaganda and government claims that everything is going according to plan, clearly see that Russia is not winning this war and no major strategic gains have been made, causing many people, even those who initially supported the invasion, to lose their support of the invasion. And even though Russia is not a full democracy, and many people will tell you it's a dictatorship, I myself would agree, if most of the people in the country want Russia to pull out, it will. The Soviet Union was not a democracy when it left Afghanistan. If enough people are protesting and enough people are demonstrating their dissatisfaction with this war and with this invasion, Russia will have to leave the country. Now, Vladimir Putin has gone on a massive campaign to increase support at home and increase the morale of the soldiers in Ukraine. Notably, shutting down any form of dissent. As we've previously reported, thousands of protesters against this war have been arrested, and the arrests are just continuing. Social media, which is containing pro-Western, pro-democratic, pro-Ukrainian, or generally factual information, has been shut down. In addition to this, Vladimir Putin has been holding massive rallies to gain the support of the Ukrainian people and invoking history and religion to ensure blind support and obedience for his invasion of the much smaller country of Ukraine. Now, in terms of the soldiers in the country, the government of Russia has guaranteed each soldier the same rights or benefits that any other soldier in a previous Russian or Soviet conflict had before. These benefits include things such as tax breaks, a discount on utilities, and preferential medical treatment. This is done to either inspire more people to come and join the invasion or join the Russian forces, or to inspire those forces that are currently fighting in Ukraine to fight harder. A lot of this is a mental battle, and much of the reason that Russia has not been able to advance and that its advance has been completely stalled is the sheer mental will of the Ukrainian people, who again are fighting brutally, fiercely, and ruthlessly, and doing anything they can to stop this Russian invasion. Again, Russian soldiers are just there doing their job. They are not there because of some greater ideological reason that transcends their own existence and they're willing to fight and die for. They're just at a 9 to 5. Keep that in mind. Now, basically, what this trims down to is how the endgame could look like for Ukraine. The reality is Ukraine simply has to keep resisting Russian advances on Kyiv, on Mariupol, and on other cities, though the most crucial are the capital city of Kyiv, because it's the capital, and that is where the government of Ukraine is located. If that is toppled, Ukraine essentially is going to fall into a very disorganized insurgency. And Mariupol, because if Mariupol falls, Russia is going to be able to establish a land border with its eastern forces and those in Crimea, a land and a portion of land, a peninsula that Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Basically, Ukraine simply has to hold out until Russia either loses enough soldiers or Vladimir Putin loses enough support at home. Something that the West is making more likely. Sanctions on Russia are increasing on a daily basis, either imposed by Western governments such as the United States or the European Union, or by private companies on their own, not being required to by regulation, but pretty much having to do so to maintain their investors. Many companies, many importers, many basic goods, many basic services have left Russia, making life fundamentally difficult for everyday Russians. Vladimir Putin's propaganda is stating that this is the West's fault, being completely against Russia and trying to hurt the Russian people. I guess, to some extent, that can be perceived as true. But the reality is that form of propaganda and that kind of message can only last so long. And when the Russian people get hungry enough, or they miss basic services and are sick of being an isolated, essentially third world country because of the sanctions, they will put pressure on their regime. And also, there has been dissent at the highest levels of Russian government, with people that have a lot of influence over Vladimir Putin stating that they don't support this goddamn war or invasion, or at the very least, want it to come to an end. So to answer the question, is Russia losing the war? The answer, at least for now, is a yes. But that does not mean it's a cause of celebration for Ukraine or its allies. The reality is speaking in terms of the long term. So we're talking about months and years of a potential invasion. Russia is absolutely the favored party. Russia's military is much larger. It is much better equipped. And fundamentally, even though it's had major losses and a lack of morale for now, it is better organized. And the reality is if Russia's military has enough time to regroup, reorganize, and re-strategize, simply based on the laws of advantages, Russia will have an easier time to take over the government of Ukraine. It's simply inevitable. If Russia's invasion lasts long enough, it will topple the government of Volodymyr Zelensky. It will be able to occupy the nation. Now, will this lead to an insurgency? Yes, it probably will. Will this last many, 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 many horrible, terrible, terrible years for Russia and the Ukrainian people? Indeed, it would. But the reality is Russia is losing now, but it can win eventually if it has enough time or enough will from people domestically speaking. So the solution here, or the real only profitable endgame for both sides, would be some kind of peace agreement. Russia is losing face. It's inside some kind of conflict that can only be won through attrition and lasting as long as they can, or completely destroying Ukraine and following the same tactics that Russia used in countries like Syria, or the trying to be independent now region of Russia, Chechnya, by completely leveling cities and indiscriminately or intentionally killing civilians. Without these tactics, Russia is going to be in a long, drawn-out conflict where Ukraine is going to lose a lot of its people and its economy is going to be destroyed. It is in everyone's best interest for some kind of peace agreement to be made. Now keep in mind that even when Russia leaves the country, and even if the government of Volodymyr Zelensky does not get toppled, this will technically be a victory for Ukraine. But let's look at the country now. Many cities, especially Mariupol, have been completely destroyed. The economic cost on Ukraine is going to be massive, and it's going to take decades for it to fully recover from this military intervention. And the reality is when Ukraine is facing massive economic hardships, it does not tend to lean towards the West or towards the European Union. Basically, after this war, if Ukraine does not receive billions every single year on a regular basis in Western foreign aid, it will eventually shift to some kind of political option that favors Russia. So, at the end of the day, while Russia is losing the conflict right now, or at the very least its initial invasion, and has completely embarrassed itself on the international stage, in the long term, it has ruined the country of Ukraine, and that can lead to an eventual victory. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think Russia is completely done for and this is the end of Vladimir Putin. Maybe you think Russia is winning, everything's going to plan, and all of the information we see is just Russia bad propaganda by, I don't know, the mainstream media. Let me know whatever you think in the comments. Let's just please keep it civil and have a nice open discussion. I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video if you like.